primarily for math educators, this text advocates for a collective approach to dismantling white supremacy. When you frame like we need to change the way we teach math because of black people, that framing is just so toxic, I think. In my opinion, that like you have a whole like 7 white old guys from Get Out are in a room and it's like, I think if black people did like African tribal dances, I feel like this is I feel like if I was PragerU, this is like a gold mine of like fucking quotes. Am I booming right now? A pathway to equitable math instruction, dismantling racism and mathematics instruction. Exercises where educators reflect on their own biases to transform their instructional practice. While primarily for math educators, this text advocates for a collective approach to dismantling white supremacy. The school-wide approach ensures that anti-racist work is not left alone to one individual, i.e. a math teacher or the director of equity, but to enlist the support and voice of all stakeholders in the school ecosystem. Jesus. Critical praxis, deconstructing racism in mathematics instruction. The terms used in the engagement section of this resource are ideas presented in the Dismantling Racism Workbook, notebook grounded on the work of Jones and Okun. It is important to read this article first to fully understand the terms that are identified as characteristics of white supremacy culture and organizations. This is really cringe. I feel like this is really cringe. Okay. Dismantling white supremacy culture in math classrooms. These common practices that perpetuate white supremacy culture, create and sustain institutional systemic barriers to equity for Black, Latinx. Oh, man. Okay. Let me just... Okay, we can do this. Okay, just chill. In order to embody anti-racist math education, teachers must engage in critical praxis that interrogates the ways in which they perpetuate white supremacy culture in their own classrooms and develop a path towards anti-race. Man, I hate that term. I hate that term. It's such a bad term. Oh, God, it's such a bad term. Use culturally relevant, anti-racist pedagogy practices and curriculum, cultivate mathematical identity so that everyone can see themselves as mathematicians, design homework policies that are responsive to the lives of students of color in order to support their learning needs. What is this? Hold on. Recognize and name the mathematical strengths of students of color and teach them to recognize these strengths in themselves and others. Intentionally integrate physical movements in math classes. This is where, like... fuck. Okay, fuck. I might be booming. I might be booming right now, okay? So, it is of my opinion, I truly felt like, and maybe this is the way of the past, I thought that Black people had brains that were, like, pretty similar to white people. I thought that, like, when it comes to stuff like math, like the axioms upon which math are built and the way that we compute shit, it was about the same. I don't think there's, like, a big difference between Black people and white people brains. I'm sorry, like, I'm getting the idea that, like, you have a whole, like, 7 white old guys from Get Out are in a room and it's like, I think if Black people did, like, African tribal dances while doing, like, basic addition and subtraction, I think that would really synergize with, like, their ethnic roots. Like, I don't know. Fuck. I might just be booming hard. I might just be booming hard when I read stuff like this. I don't know, man. I don't know, man. Like, maybe I'm just booming. Center ethno-mathematics. Recognize the ways that communities of color engage in mathematics and problem solving in their everyday lives. I feel like this is like the scene in The Wire where he's like, okay, well, let's say that a crackhead buys 2, like, whatever from you. Like, what's the count? Teach that mathematics can help solve problems affecting students, communities. Model the use of math as a solution to their immediate problems, needs, or desires. Like, am I booming right now? Identify and challenge the ways that math is used to uphold capitalist, imperialist, and racist views. Teach the value of math as both an abstract concept. Expose students to examples of people who have used math as resistance. I feel like there are, one thing that I do appreciate is I think it's cool or nice when there are crossovers between different disciplines. So I wouldn't take issue with this, right? Like, you're in the middle of a math class and maybe you learn something like, oh, well, historically, like, this event happened, and you remember it from like a history class. I actually think those types of like cross-disciplinary moments in like high school and grade school, I think that those are actually like really positive. I think that's okay. But man. Rely on teamwork and collaboration as much as possible. Teach mathematics through project-based learning and other engaging approaches. Support students to reclaim their mathematical ancestry. Expose students to mathematicians of color, particularly women of color and queer mathematicians of color, both through historical examples and by... I feel like... I'm trying to think, I don't know if I learned about, like, except for, like, really late in calc, do you ever learn about, like, the actual mathematicians? I don't think anything through algebra, pre-calc, calc 1 or 2. I guess, like, some equations can be named after people, or, like, the Pythagorean theorem. I'm trying to remember in any of my math classes. Gaussian? I think we maybe learned a little bit about that guy. I don't know. Yeah, I think a lot of the theorems are named. Which is, I guess, is kind of cool. This isn't actually really like a bad thing. Learning about like mathematicians of color, that's not really a bad thing. That's me booming a little bit. That's fine. Each month, you will complete a set of exercises as outlined in the calendar. You will engage in a 5-step cycle as follows. Engage with the ways that white supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms. Reflect on your current classroom practices to identify the ways in which they perpetuate white supremacy culture. I feel like this is I feel like if I was PragerU, this is like a gold mine of like fucking quotes. People keep saying anti-racism, and I haven't learned it all about that. I don't know what the fuck anti-racism is. I mean, you didn't attend the phrenology math class. Yeah.
I have some insider knowledge as to how this sheet is made.
About, yeah, go for it.
So I went to a very not black high school. I was one of 9 black students in my graduating class, which meant I got invited to a lot of diversity meetings and shit, where they tried to figure out how to make the school more accepting to black students. And how these things end up getting made is you were correct. It's a bunch of white boomers in a room that are really scared of being racist. And so they think, well, how do we not be racist? And they find like the wokest undergrads that they possibly can.
I mean, like the problem is that it's like the way that these are written, and again, I might be booming, but it just sounds like black people are kind of like animals. And it's like, well, if we run them around, yeah, it's like really weird. Yeah. I could totally understand like this framework when it comes to things like history and stuff, for sure. There's a lot that gets overlooked, but a lot of this is like very much like black brains don't learn like white brains do, so we need to like appeal to them on like a different level. It's like, I don't know, I'm not sure. It just comes off as really weird to me. I don't know. Kogasa seems to disagree, and he probably knows more math than anybody else in my chat, so you can take that for what it's worth.
And then I know you're done talking about this, but speaking as the Zoomer expert, all right, I was in high school like 3 years ago, and APUSH, they rushed through the entire second half of the 20th century in like 3 weeks, and it's during the time when you're studying for exams.
Yeah.
So you learn nothing.
I wonder
like
if
the Korean War was a bullet point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I remember. We would get like, because I feel like we might have gone over, but it was literally like one paragraph. This is gonna sound really stupid, and I hope that it's not this stupid, but I wonder if like a lot of history curriculums have been written and just slightly updated, but the curriculums are like 60 years old, so they just haven't added anything that's happened past like 1964. I don't know, that like I would hope that's not the case, like. But yeah.
Everything that I learned about anything after MLK was from an elective class that like 10 people took. And that was the only education that I got as to anything past MLK.
Yeah. Destiny, try to look past the undeniable cringe parts of this document, give it a more trouble reading. Incorporate movements a pretty fucking far stretch from black brains need movement more than white brains to learn. Devin put it well, one of the big issues is the more traditional rigidity of the learning environments, which is particularly problematic in math. Okay, now Kogasa, I 1,000,000,000,000% disagree. No, I agree with you there. And this is part of the reasons why I liked some of the, people called it Common Core math, but some of the like newer ways of teaching math, I'm super in favor of that. And even when you talk about like movement and everything, like I'm okay with that too. I think that math education, if you have a brain for whatever reason that's kind of wired for math, I think that you're gonna do okay. But oh my God, if you do not have a brain that's wired for math, you are fucked, because teachers for math are horrible in school. It is so bad. You will not get an intuitive grasp conceptually of anything having to do with even arithmetic in school because of how teachers teach it. You'll memorize times tables and like math. I don't think that you can get far in math with rote memorization, because you have to understand the concepts. And then like even people's abilities to do mental math, I think, are really fucked because they just don't understand the concepts because they were given stuff to memorize. I agree with you there 1,000,000%. But framing it as a race thing is what makes it really weird to me. So like, if you're gonna tell me that like, I think that we can teach like math in so many different ways, like incorporating physical movement or something into it, then yeah, that's cool. But if you're gonna tell me that like, now that we have black kids in classrooms, we need to incorporate physical movement, it takes on a way different shade, no pun intended. Like now it just looks way different. But I totally agree with you in terms of like yeah, we need to approach the way we teach math way differently, for sure. But just framing that through a racial lens, the feeling that I get, and I don't feel like it's a stretch, the feeling that I get is that like, we have to do it differently because of black people. Not just because like, the way we teach math, period, is garbage. If there were no other racial issues in education, then I would agree, but the specific point is part of a much broader critique, right? Yeah, but I think you have to be careful to not let your critique seep into everything. And because I feel like you come away with such a different feeling. And if I'm coming away with these feelings, like, I can read these very, very, very charitably. I can, but that's just because I have so much background here. I have so much background that I'd be able to do it. But I think any normal person reading this is going to come away thinking that, like, the African savage brain, like, needs to be catered to, and like, that's legitimately, I know for a fact that if somebody was writing a PragerU video, that's what they would be taking away from this. And you'd be able to do it very convincingly with, like, how a lot of this is written. Like, I just think that, like, when you frame, like, we need to change the way we teach math because of black people, that framing is just so toxic, I think, in my opinion. But, like, yeah, I mean, like, I could, man, if I would feel like, is it Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird trying to defend this curriculum in court, like, against a bunch of conservatives? Like, I might be able to do it, but it would be like the case of my fucking life. It would be so hard to do it. And I just feel like it's so unnecessarily combative, which is because the problem too is that, like, when we talk about, like, curriculum, we're not just talking about, like, a concept in physics or chemistry where it's like, sorry, dog, this is true, whether you like it or not, here's this, like, suck it, right? We're talking about stuff that has to be conveyed to parents, right? You're gonna have to, this is literally debate level. You're gonna have to argue with parents and convince them that their kids need to be taught in this manner, right? So I think it also has to be written with that framing in mind, you know? What is this? Unpopular opinion. Some of these anti-racist education documents that the right are freaking out about are actually are poorly written and kind of racist. I read one last week and yikes. I appreciate that folks are enthusiastic about doing better, but nobody needs your noblest oblige. Suggesting kids of color do math differently biologizes race essentialism. Like, yeah, this is my takeaway from this. That's what it feels like. But, like, man, as a kid with massive ADHD, I'm super in favor of teaching math differently and even incorporating physical movement, which is cool. I think that there's, like, a lot of math that should play into, like, our daily lives. But doing it from the lens of race is just so fucking weird to me. It's so weird. Like, yeah, it sounds like there's, like, a white math, a black math, a Latino math, a Muslim math. Like, it's just, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm harping on this a lot, but... Also, math, I don't think should ever have any intersection, at least in a math classroom, talking about, like, upholding white supremacist capitalism. I think that's too far. Unless you have, like, a very, very, very relevant example. That's, like, a little bit too much. There's a difference between pointing out to kids of color where math is a technique that is being practiced in their community, for example, beadwork, and suggesting kids can only connect with material that uses stereotypes of their culture. Yeah, that was, okay, fine. Okay, I feel a little less crazy now. Because when I read that, it literally makes it sound like we need to talk about, like, oh, well, if you were a drug dealer, like, how many ounces of marijuana would you sell for blah? Like, that's what it reads like to me. Like, what would kids in the ghetto be able to more relate to? It feels like that scene in The Wire. Like, I'm thinking of when Wallace is teaching his little brother, like, how to do, like, math story problems. Anyways, I'm not a K-12 pedagogy expert, but I am competent at recognizing condescending, guilt-ridden racist language. What's in the document I read last week? The conservatives are poorly motivated, but not always totally wrong in their reading. When I made the decolonizing science reading list, my point was never that students can't connect with these ideas. My point was that we should tell the truth about the context and history of our knowledge systems. I do believe that if we do that, kids will connect with it better. Personally, the standard POC will do science differently language that drives some of equity discourse has to be really carefully thought out about. Because yes, culture affects our goals and ways of thinking, but where we demarcate who belongs to what culture is complex. We all know that white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, and Black American culture can be quite different, but there's a lot of overlap since our lives overlap in shared national borders, even if not always local geographies, and we are politically linked and actually the same species. Yes, yeah. Apparently, it needs to be said in this thread that upending white supremacist / heterosis patriarchy in our society's curriculum is very important. I'm not questioning that premise. I'm saying some of the efforts I'm seeing aren't doing what they think they're doing. Adding to this thread, because apparently it's anti-woke amateur hour here on Twitter, me saying that these adaptations, that there are adaptations I don't like doesn't mean critical race theory is bad. Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, so this lady is struggling with everything that I'm struggling with now. Thank you, okay. Is this a black person or a white person on a, hold on, I'm just curious. I think this is a white person, I think. Oh, or Jewish? This is oh shit. Jewish in profile. Well,
careful, buddy.
Okay, so I'm sorry, is Jewish It's white if you're not an alt-righter, but if you are an alt-righter, it's not white? Or do black people consider people Jew? I don't know who's considered. Yeah,